Good morning, and welcome back to America's Leaders from Coast to Coast, the 250th Anniversary Edition. I'm Stephen.
And I'm Leah.
We are heading north today. Way north. Past the industrial hubs of Detroit, over the Mackinac Bridge, and into the vast wilderness of the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, the land of pasties, snowmobiles, thick pine forests, and freezing winters. We are exploring Michigan's 1st District. And we are profiling a man who brings some serious, heavy-duty brass to the halls of Congress. We are talking about Republican Representative Jack Bergman.
General Bergman. And Stephen, we have to emphasize that title is not honorary. Jack Bergman is a retired 3-star lieutenant general in the United States Marine Corps. He holds the distinction of being the highest-ranking combat veteran ever elected to the U.S. House of Representatives. He spent 40 years in uniform. He flew CH-46 helicopters in the Vietnam War. He eventually commanded the entire Marine Forces Reserve. When Jack Bergman walks into a briefing room at the Pentagon, the active duty generals sit up straighter. That kind of lived military experience is incredibly rare in Congress today, and it gives him a massive amount of credibility on the Armed Services Committee.
It really does. And he uses that credibility constantly. For example, he recently co-led a bipartisan delegation to secure a huge win for his state. Camp Grayling, which is a massive military training facility in northern Michigan, was officially designated as a national range for uncrewed aerial systems testing by the Department of Defense. Basically, it's going to be the premier testing ground for military drones. He understands that the future of warfare is unmanned, and he made sure his district is at the center of developing that technology.
And that ties perfectly into his work on national security and domestic supply chains. General Bergman has been one of the loudest voices in the House, warning about the influence of the Chinese Communist Party in American manufacturing. Specifically, there has been a huge ongoing controversy in Michigan about a planned electric vehicle battery plant in Big Rapids, involving a company called Gotion, which has ties to China. Bergman introduced the No GOTION Act to block federal green energy tax credits from going to any company affiliated with, quote, countries of concern. He frames it very simply. American tax dollars should not be used to subsidize our geopolitical adversaries, especially not in the American heartland.
Let's pivot to Veterans Affairs, because if armed services is his expertise, the VA is his absolute passion project. He serves on the House Veterans Affairs Committee, and representing the 1st District means he has to tackle rural health care. This district has one of the highest concentrations of veterans in the entire country. But here is the problem. It's geographically massive. There are no major sprawling VA medical centers deep in the Upper Peninsula. Veterans were having to drive 8 or 9 hours, sometimes through brutal lake-effect blizzards, just to get to a VA facility in Detroit or Milwaukee.
Right, which is completely unacceptable. Bergman has been fighting for years to expand, quote, community care, meaning the VA pays for a veteran to see a local private doctor in their own town. And recently, he really hit the gas on veteran legislation. He introduced the Beacon Act, which is a bipartisan bill to modernize how the VA treats traumatic brain injuries, or TBIs. It expands access to innovative, non-pharmacological therapies so veterans aren't just handed a bottle of pills. He also pushed the Veterans Stand Act, which focuses on cutting-edge tech for veterans with spinal cord injuries. And he reintroduced, quote, Gerald's Law, which permanently closes a bizarre bureaucratic loophole that was denying burial benefits to certain veterans, based entirely on the location where they spent their final days.
He really digs into the unglamorous fine print details of how the government works. Speaking of unglamorous but essential, the United States Postal Service. Bergman is the co-chair of the Congressional Postal Service Caucus, and he recently led a bipartisan rebellion against the Postmaster General. The USPS tried to implement a new rule that would change how postmarks are dated, which sounds minor, but in rural areas where mail takes longer to process, it could invalidate legal documents, ballots, and bill payments. Bergman rallied members from both sides of the aisle to demand a reversal, fighting to protect rural mail service from being treated as an afterthought by Washington bureaucrats.
He is the ultimate champion of the Yoopers. For our listeners outside the Midwest, a Yooper is someone from the UP, the Upper Peninsula. It is a very distinct, rugged culture, and you can't represent the UP without talking about the Great Lakes. MI-01 borders 3 of the 5 Great Lakes, Superior, Michigan, and Huron. Despite being a conservative Republican who generally favors cutting federal spending, Bergman is a fierce defender of the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative, the GLRI. He knows that if the lakes are polluted, or if invasive species like the Asian carp get in and destroy the fisheries, the tourism economies of places like Traverse City and Mackinac Island will collapse. For Bergman, environmental conservation is an economic and conservative imperative.
And on the topic of wildlife, we have to mention a huge legislative victory he had. The House passed a bill he heavily backed to officially delist the gray wolf from the Federal Endangered Species Act. This has been a massive point of contention in northern Michigan. Farmers and ranchers were losing livestock to wolves, but federal protections prevented them from taking action. Bergman argued that the wolf population has fully recovered and that wildlife management needs to be returned to state and tribal authorities, not dictated by Washington.
We also need to highlight the Sioux Locks in Sault Ste. Marie. This is one of Bergman's perennial battles. The Sioux Locks are arguably the most critical and vulnerable infrastructure choke point in the North American economy. Almost all of the iron ore mined in Minnesota has to pass through these locks on massive freighters to reach the steel mills in Detroit, Cleveland, and Gary. If the locks suffer a catastrophic failure, the U.S. auto industry would grind to a halt in a matter of weeks. Bergman uses his seat on the Budget Committee to ensure the modernization and construction of a new superlock stays funded.
He is running on his sheer weight of experience. He is essentially telling voters, I have the rank, I have the relationships, and I know how to navigate the Pentagon and the VA better than anyone else.
From the cockpit of a CH-46 in Vietnam to the freezing shores of Lake Superior.
The highest-ranking combat veteran in the House and the fierce defender of the Great North.
That is General Jack Bergman.
That is our profile for Michigan's 1st District. Stay tuned for our next profile. Please note, AI assists in the creation of this podcast from pointedwords.com, and remember, better pointed words than pointed swords.